Welcome to Stories from the Village of Nothing Much. Like easy listening, but for fiction. I'm Kathryn Nicolai. I write and read all the stories you'll hear on the Village of Nothing Much. Audio engineering and sound design is by Bob Wittersheim. In our show notes, you'll find links to our ad-free premium version, our other shows, and our new wind-down box, a quarterly sleep subscription box full of products that I've hand-picked to bring a little more joy and ease to your bedtime. One of my favorite experiences as a reader is finding a map in the opening pages of a new book. There is something about being able to situate the action while I read it, to imagine the various locations and understand how they connect to each other. That makes me feel like I'm really part of the world of the story. This might be a good time to say that there is a beautiful illustrated map of the Village of Nothing Much in my book called Nothing Much Happens. Ask your favorite librarian or bookshop keeper today. Anyway, I wanted to invite you deep into this world. So even if you don't have a copy of the map handy, know that just by listening, you'll be joining us in the village. There is space for you here. You can sit with us. Oh, and if you stick around after the stories, I'll share some behind-the-scenes information about the village, the way the stories connect to each other, and how we ended up here. Before we get started, let's take a deep breath in and sigh from your mouth. One more, like you mean it. Breathe in and let it out. Good. Our stories today lean into the romance and sentimental feelings of the summer. We'll start with In the Kitchen During a Storm, as the wind picks up and the pomodoro sauce simmers on the stove. This story, by the way, mentions alcohol, in case that doesn't work for you and you need to skip it. Then we'll put the river on our left and roll down the windows as we visit the turnaround. We'll look out at the lighthouses and creep closer to the shore to listen to the water lap at the rocks. Finally, we'll follow the call of a summer evening out to the park where a memory long forgotten arises in some place only we know. In the Kitchen During a Storm. It was early evening, and I was flipping through a case of old records. Billie Holiday? Ella? Oh, Chet Baker. That will do nicely. I slipped it out of the sleeve and tilted the surface to the light. I blew the dust off and slid it onto the turntable. I lifted the needle and let it touch down into the groove of the record. Leaning back in my chair, I put my feet up. As I listened, I hummed along, and tucking one arm behind my head, looked out at the window at the silver undersides of leaves on the trees in my back garden. The wind was picking up. It had been a gray day, but humid and still hot. Then, just in the last hour or so, I'd felt the temperature begin to drop. I stepped barefoot through my back door and stood on the still warm stones of my patio. I took a deep breath to taste the air, and I was sure rain was coming. There is a feeling of energy around a storm. At first, it might just be the relief of the cooling air, but then there is an excitement or a feeling of potential that boosts you up and clears your head. I stood a while longer, looking out at the darkening sky and gripping the stones under my feet with my toes. I knew what I would do. I stepped back into the house and walked through the rooms, cracking windows and lighting candles. I turned the music higher and stepped into the kitchen, where I hadn't seriously been for a few days because of the heat. I had a large window over my kitchen sink, and a row of potted herbs stood on its sill. It was an old window, as it was an old house, so I had to prop it open with a short wooden block to keep it from slamming shut. The breeze blew through my tiny herb garden, and I could smell basil and oregano. I had a bottle of red wine, opened from the night before, and I reached into a cupboard for a jam jar to drink from. Sometimes I was fancy and used my best stemmed wine glasses, but often when I was home alone and just pottering around the kitchen, drinking from an old squat jam jar seemed just about right. I pulled a wooden chopping board from a drawer and laid out my chef's knife and put a wide, low skillet on the range. I was going to make spaghetti al pomodoro, the way I had been taught to years ago in Italy. It was an incredibly simple dish that used only a few ingredients and came together in no time, but its tangy, bright flavor took me straight back to afternoon meals around my family's table on the rocky southern Italian coast. I'd been a foreign exchange student, and although I didn't possess a drop of Italian blood, I felt that after a year walking her streets and learning her language and falling in love with her people, I had earned some Italianness. My host family had taken me in and loved me, laughed at my funny accent, and rolled their eyes at my overly independent American tendencies. But I'd become a member of the family, and even now, years later, we were close. Lunch came at around 2 p.m. in Italy, and trudging home from school, I would wonder what kind of pasta my mama would be cooking up that day. I'd take the stairs, 4 flights up to our apartment, slip my house key into the lock and crack it just an inch, then stick my nose into the doorway and take a deep breath in. Now, more or less a grown-up in my own home, I smiled at the memory and pulled together the ingredients for my dinner. I filmed the bottom of the pan with good olive oil and took a yellow onion from the pantry. Mama had shown me many times that less was more in her cooking, that just because you have a whole onion doesn't mean the dish needs a whole onion. I was a dutiful daughter and cut a third off the whole and sliced through the layers a few times. I slipped them into the pan and turned the heat to low. I just wanted to warm them through and give them a tiny bit of color. Back to the pantry for a large can of whole peeled tomatoes, grown and packed just a few miles from where I'd lived. Mama passed them through an old-fashioned food mill in her kitchen, turning the crank slowly and letting the tomato skins catch in the wire weave of the filter. It made a smooth sauce that slipped over the noodles and coated them. I tipped mine into a bowl and used my fingers to break them up a bit instead. I didn't tell my mama this. Everyone has their secrets. I added the tomatoes to the pan and tipped salt into the palm of my hand to measure it, then dusted it down into the tomatoes and stirred. I kept the heat on the low end of medium and pinched a few basil leaves from my pot by the window to toss whole into the sauce. The rain was falling now, and I pressed my palm to the sill to check if it was raining in. It wasn't, and I was glad. The smell of the grass and trees cooling in the rain was lovely. I put a pot of water on the stove for the spaghetti and sipped from my jam jar. The record had stopped, and I wandered back into the other room to turn it over. As I set the needle on the record, I saw a flash of lightning in the darkening sky. I waited, sitting back on my heels by the record player, as the rumbling thunder grew louder. What a perfect night for pasta and wine. My water was boiling, and I spun the spaghetti into the pot so it spread out and began to sink. Some people stand over the pot and test the noodles every few minutes or do some other nonsense about throwing pieces against the wall. But if you want properly cooked al dente pasta, it's simple. Buy good pasta made in Italy and cook it for the length of time it says on the package. They know what they're doing. I set out a place for myself where I could look out at the storm and hear the music, and filled my jam jar again. I drained my pasta and tipped it into the sauce, coating the noodles, and with mouth watering, plated it up. I set my plate down and sat myself at the table. I raised my glass to Chet Baker and my mama, and to lightning, and to bare feet on patio stones, and fresh basil. I tipped my nose down to my plate and let the sweet, tangy steam cover my face. The turnaround. To find this place, put the river on your left and just keep driving. You might lose sight of the water now and then when you go through the high cattails and the thick milkweed that by midsummer has grown up higher than your head. But even when you can't see the river, you can feel it, can't you? I can always feel it. Even blindfolded and spun around 6 times in the yard behind the cottage, I regain my balance and turn my head this way and that, and confidently point my hand like it's the needle of a compass straight toward the flowing water. When you come through the cattails and the road has shrunk to just one rutted lane, you're almost there. This is the moment, if you haven't done it yet, to roll down the windows and let the sound of the cicadas override the music on the radio. This is when I stick an arm out into the thick summer air and with palm down and fingers forward, surf over the rushing current with hand and forearm and elbow. The water that was only on your left before is now also on your right. The river is joining up with its sister, and the road is now a causeway, carefully picking its way out into a lake. Where it all stops is just a cul-de-sac of gravel and wildflowers and slopey, sanding earth that inevitably is called by everyone around here the turnaround. I can never just turn around here, though. I always pull my car onto the weedy shoulder and get out. How could you not? If you've made it this far, there is time to look out across all of this water, to squint at the horizon where the line of waves meets the air in the distance. And that's where I am today, with my back leaned against the sun-warmed panels of my car and the breeze cooling my skin. There are tire marks in the grass where other recent motorists have stopped to take in the view. In the center of the turnaround, there's a circle of squat logs around the ashy remnants of last night's bonfire, a heart drawn in the sandy dust near it. I've sat many nights on those logs, listening to stories and making up a few of my own to contribute to the collective memory of a summer. On the far side of the drive, on the rocky slope of the embankment, is the place where I sat with my cousins when we were just old enough to drive and had somehow managed to be given the car keys. Our folks understanding, I suppose, that we could only take so much time with the grown-ups around the dinner table. We'd played our favorite songs for each other and compared the war stories of high school and predicted where we'd all be 20 years from that night. I'd come and gone from this place many times, but though those predictions had fallen far from the mark, as the imaginings of our previous selves often do, I'd known then that a summer would never go by without me, at some point, standing right here. I walked down a path between rocks and bulrushes to the edge of the water. I squatted down to trail my fingers through it. It was still cold, and would be until the end of August when enough sunny days had finally, and only slightly, warmed it. I remembered the way the first dip of the day could take your breath away. As children at the cottage where we spun in circles in the backyard, the river was framed by a breakwall, and we'd stand on the edge of it, feeling the warmth built up in the steel under our feet and already shivering with the anticipation of that first cold plunge. But after we'd finally gotten up the courage to jump, we'd be in and out 100 times before the day was over. "Watch this," we'd call out to the chattering grown-ups under the umbrellas, who would nod at us as we played. "I'm going to jump like Superman. I'm going to make a cannonball." Aunts and uncles would use the latter, easing themselves down and taking breaks as the cold water rose over their ankles and knees, and their breath came in faster and faster puffs, telling us to hold the inner tube steady for them to drop into, and inevitably flipping out of it as soon as their weight landed just an inch to one side of center. They'd sputter and laugh when they popped back up. They'd call out to the others on the land about how cold it was, but after a minute or two, they'd forget about the cold and just swim. I stood up from my squat by the water and looked out far across the vast spread of blue to spot the two shapes in the distance, one a bit closer and the other a little farther away. I suppose not landmarks, but watermarks of this place. Two lighthouses showing the line of safe passage out in the channel. I wondered about what it had been like to build them over 150 years ago, to lay the foundations for them out in the moving water, to construct the houses with their winding stairs and top floors of windows. Were the keepers lonely, or the sort of quiet people who enjoyed the solitude of water spreading out in every direction around them? My father told a story about himself and a friend and a rowboat when they were still kids, and how they rowed all the way out to the nearer one. As they had made it back to their own dinner tables before the food had gone cold, they'd never been found out. But looking out across all this water, it seemed like an impossibility. And I reminded myself that no one likes a good story as much as a dad does. I climbed back up the path and into the heat of my front seat. When I was here, there were certain places I had to link up with, like a baseball player tagging up to a base. These were the touchstones that I oriented myself by. I put the river on my left, the lighthouses in front of me, and the stories of my family firmly at my center. someplace only we know.
I knew the pathway like the back of my hand.
As a teenager, I had a fascination with the feel and the smell, the look of summer evenings. It was the romance of them. I'd be hopping down the front steps of my house, and I'd think, anything could happen tonight. And likely nothing much would. My friends and I would spend another night drinking coffee in a diner, or watching a movie, or listening to music on someone's car stereo in the lot by the park. But still, I never lost the feeling that summer nights had an extra dose of magical possibility. It's that warm, humid night air that makes us less afraid. The winter keeps us inside, nested and resting. The summer pushes us out. Go meet someone, make a friend, discover something, it says. And I had. I'd almost stayed in tonight. I'd stood in the kitchen rinsing my plate after dinner, pasta tossed with olive oil, the first few cherry tomatoes of the season, and a handful of herbs from my window box, and looked out at the evening sky. I could stay in, I thought. I'd been sketching in my notebook and listening to music, and more of that sounded just fine. But then the wind shifted, and I felt the touch of it on my face. The kitchen filled up with the scent of summer night air, and I felt that same pull from when I'd been 15. Come out, come see. Who knows what you might find? A few minutes later, I was coasting on my bike through the streets of my neighborhood. The day had been hot, and the air rushing over my skin felt cooling and just right. I didn't know where I was going, just kept pedaling. I stood up on my pedals and pushed my way up a hill, then soared giddily down the other side. I circled through the district of old Victorian homes and slowed down to nosily peek through the wrought iron gates, hiding, in some cases, tidy English gardens with rows of evenly spaced lavender plants, and in others, overgrown wilderness, slowly reclaiming an abandoned yard. I thought I liked the abandoned places the best. They seemed full of secrets and stories. I rode into town and skimmed past corners of bustling street cafes. People were eating and drinking and telling stories. I stopped at a light and looked at a couple sharing a meal. I thought it might be their first date. They seemed a little tentative. Quick glimpses back and forth. But then a laugh and an earnest smile. Maybe the second date. I pedaled into the park and racked my bike by the bookstall, now shuttered for the night. I bought a lemon ice from a man with a cart and sat by the path for a few minutes to eat it. There was something on the edge of my memory, something about this park. Maybe it was the lemon ice on my tongue that brought it back. Had we eaten it that night? Deep summer, cicadas singing, and we'd parked our bikes over there. I got to my feet and dropped my empty cup in the recycle can. I turned and looked through my memory toward a path at the back edge of the park. I felt pulled down it, narrow gravel at first that became wood chips and packed sandy earth under my feet. We'd come here, down this path. We'd found it just walking and exploring. The path opened up into a broad meadow with a row of close arborvitaes along one side. I turned to look at them. They made a thick wall of green branches and seemed to mark the end of the park. But no, there was a space. Camouflaged in the evening twilight, no wider than my shoulders, where you could slip through and step down. And yes, here it was. That night we'd stepped through and found this place, a sunken garden. We'd stood with wide eyes, and I'd laughed in a nervous, giddy way. We thought we'd stumbled on a place that had never been found before. Isn't that the way when you're young? You feel like you are discovering and inventing everything as you go. Like no one's ever loved like this before, or had their heart broken like yours, or a million other instances of growing up and becoming yourself. There was a stone pool, long and a little green, running along the line of trees, and in the corner a small mossy bench and a crumbling statue of a lady disappearing into ivy. My heart beat a bit faster, remembering. We'd been like the couple at the cafe, tentative and a little timid. But we couldn't beat back the power of a summer night. It won out over shyness. Had it been me to reach out first, to lean in, or had it been... So glad I'd gone out tonight. On a summer night, anything might happen. You could find your way back to something forgotten, to a place only we knew. Now, before I send you back home, I thought I'd talk a little about the stories behind these stories, because there are a few. First, in the kitchen. Okay, I admit it. The story is kind of about me. I was a foreign exchange student to Italy when I was 16. I spent a whole year in Salerno at the bottom of the Amalfi Coast, and I am still very close to my host family. In fact, in my book, beside the recipe for pasta al pomodoro is a tribute to my family, and specifically to my host mama, Maria Rosaria Mele Carpentieri. Looking over these stories, I thought about how many of my summer tales are about romanticizing your life, and that is something I've been hard at work at since I was a teenager. I basically picked Italy from the list of exchange options because of the book A Room with a View. And I also love to cook, and if I love you, this is the dish I make you, pasta al pomodoro. In college, I started a small catering company. I called it La Bionda, which means blondie. It was me and a couple of friends. We'd show up to your house, bake some focaccia, serve gnocchi and tiramisu, and pretend we knew what we were doing. Good times. Now, the second story is, also kind of about me. Dang, I keep saying these aren't autobiographical. There is a very special spot where I got to spend a lot of time as a kid, a small island at the base of the Thumb of Michigan on the St. Clair River. It's a place only reachable by ferry, where my great-grandfather built a small, crooked cottage in the first years of the 20th century. It's called Harson's Island, and if you keep the river on your left, you likely will find the turnaround. My wife and I got married on the island. My family cottage still sits there, watching the ships go up and down the river. And the last story in today's episode is, not about me, mostly. Although I think it is featuring the same narrator from the first story. It came out a couple years after In the Kitchen, and she's still eating her pasta, still has her herbs up on the windowsill. While this came almost entirely from my imagination, I wonder how many of you can relate to the feeling of a memory that had nearly dissolved and then was reawakened by being in a certain place at just the right time of day or night, by tasting a flavor or smelling a scent that takes you back. My own autobiographical memory is pretty spotty because I have a condition called aphantasia. It means I'm unable to create any images in my mind's eye. I can't picture anything and never could. And many people who have aphantasia also struggle with their episodic memory. For me, I mostly find this to be a kind of gift. It makes me very present. I think the narrator in this story is definitely remembering her first kiss, and I can't remember mine. If you think it might have been you, let me know. This story is one of Bob's favorites, and I remember when he first heard it, he said it had him on the edge of his seat. In fact, I just wrote what felt like the sequel to this one. It's called Summer Afternoons, and it starts with, again, romanticizing a particular part of the day. It came out last week on the Nothing Much Happens podcast, if you'd like to hear it on your way to dreamland. Thank you for visiting the Village of Nothing Much with me. I hope you find some moments to romanticize this week. This is your one life, and you deserve to enjoy it, to feel like the main character, and to have a cup of lemon ice on a warm summer night. Thank you for visiting the Village of Nothing Much with me. I hope you find some moments to romanticize this week. This is your one life, and you deserve to enjoy it, to feel like the main character, and to have a cup of lemon ice on a warm summer night.